Welcome to Keeping Up with Trends. This is Fed Razak, Senior Trading Strategist here at CMTrading, and we're joined with your host, Sergio Davids. How are
Hey,
you,
hey, Fred.
Sergio?
I am all good. I'm excited about the start of 2024 because it's earning seasons again. So,
It
lots of
is indeed.
opportunity, lots of big companies, releasing their earnings.
Yes.
So,
Okay.
I
Where do we
guess I
start?
guess I want I guess I wanted to start off with, going full circle and putting an end to the banking crisis that never was. I remember the starting of 2023 telling you about, Silicon Valley Bank crashing, Credit Suisse being sold off, and all the media was, you know, punting the
Fear,
headlines of,
fear, 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 fear,
yeah, they
fear,
were they were
fear.
genuinely fear mongering and saying, is this the end of banking as we know it, blah 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 blah. And I remember you stood your ground and you said, no, it's not going to happen. Maybe to smaller banks, definitely not to something like, JP Morgan as an institution. Fast forward to the first earnings season of 2024 and technically the last earnings season of 2023. And we've seen the big banks just come out swinging with an amazing quarter. JP Morgan, BlackRock, Citigroup, all hitting their targets. So, what's happening in the banking sector?
Okay, just looking from a chart, okay, just technical chart. Let's just look at it from the price. In November 2023, we were trading on JP Morgan. It was a $135 stock.
Right.
As of today, it's $172 stock. So that means it's almost
Sheesh, what a
$40.
jump.
Yeah. So there are two major contributors to this. Number one is when inflation goes up, the first benefactors from inflation going up, okay, is the stocks because prices are increasing, right? So the
Right.
price of stocks are increasing by default. Now, what happens in inflation? Interest rates also go up because the Fed is trying to, or the central bank, whatever country it is that we're dealing with, is trying to control and push down inflation from getting out of control. Now, we saw in 2023 some crazy, crazy, crazy inflation that we haven't seen in about 40 years since Reagan's administration. So, as a result to that, we saw interest rates raise also to levels we haven't seen in 40 years. That's the formula that the US uses in order to control. Now, there are other technicalities that the central bank in the US can control the money supply in the market and make it more expensive and thereby staving off inflation. However, it's really a very difficult thing to do. So, with that said, JP Morgan trading at $172 because they are the first benefactors of interest rate hikes because they're making their margins no matter what. They're making larger margins, in fact, because the percentages are going higher. So, those two factors inflation, because the prices are increasing in the marketplace, and so are stock prices. And secondly, interest rates going up, the banks are making larger profits and larger percentages. Not necessarily more sales, but larger profits because of the interest rate hikes. So, with that said, they're benefiting tremendously in this type of marketplace.
Yes. And I suppose, with high inflation, puts pressure on a lot of consumers, leading to a lot of debt and loans from the bank.
So tremendous. And this is where the secondary market really thrives. In the US, I don't know how it is in South Africa. In the US, you can run up a credit line with a credit card of up to almost half of your income, yearly income. So if a person is making about $100,000 salary in the US, which is, I would say, almost average today in certain parts of the US,
Yeah, yeah.
okay, because I would say even lower than average in certain parts, like New York, probably that's lower than average. I would say average in New York is about $200,000 for a household. Um, and so if you're running a credit card debt of $100,000 and you default on it, there's nothing for the bank actually to repossess, right? I mean, there's no, it's not an asset backed loan, it's just a credit line. And as a result of that, there are a lot of people, there's enough people that default in it that there's a secondary
Yeah.
market where Chase, for example, if it's Chase or any one of the other major banks, if they have a credit line that is defaulting on them, they'll actually sell it off. Okay, if they see that the person is not paying them, they'll sell it to a secondary place where they'll do collections, right? And they'll come up with terms of, you know, and the reason that, banks benefit from this is because ultimately, um, they will, um, write this off as a tax write-off because it's a loss. Now, it's a very small percentage relative to how much sales that they do and how much credit that they revolve, but that's part of it. Okay, and that's definitely a part and parcel of it.
Yeah, I mean, it is just, it's always amazing to see specifically JP Morgan, you know, do so well, even in, you know, a tough environment that we've seen. I mean, JP Morgan is probably way too big to fail, wouldn't you say?
So JP Morgan, well, let's go back to the man himself. Happens to be they have a fantastic CEO, tremendous
Right?
visionary, very disciplined, very open-minded, a critic and a really someone that has, the market really respects, very respectful personality. Um, and as you would expect, right? It's JP Morgan's company. So JP Morgan, originally, the man JP Morgan, was one of the architects of the financial system in the United States after the markets crashed in 1929. And he was one of the people that put together the SEC, and he's the one that really regulated the markets back in the day and created the system that we have today. And this is just a fun tidbit. The saying goes, there's no free lunch in life. So it
Yeah.
happens to be JP Morgan hated that. And he said, you know what? There is free lunch in life. So in JP Morgan, you get free lunch. That's one of their, like all these high-tech companies have like these, really funky kind of offices and free kind of stuff, but he was the first one. That was like revolutionary to get free lunch at office. That's like, cool.
Wow.
But that's what he did, like, um, I'm not saying that that's the reason why they've been so successful, but they've had a certain, um, and I've actually had a friend that was recruited by JP Morgan, so I kind of know what their recruiting process is. They run a tight ship. They really do. And yeah, there's probably areas and departments that they have excess people, but ultimately, the people up on top and the people that are making the major decision making, and they're interwoven into the financial markets in the US, meaning to say, if the central government in the US wants to issue bonds, well, they have to go to someone like either Goldman Sachs or JP Morgan in order
Right.
to do that. So, they're underwriters. There's so many sectors in their businesses, besides banking and besides credit
Yeah.
cards and besides, you
And
know,
investing.
personal finance. They do so much other things that it's really, yeah, you're right. They're too big to fail. They're the largest bank and the largest financial institution in the world.
Yeah, and intricately tied with the US, economy and financial system. I suppose the government also.
Yeah. I
So,
mean,
yeah,
like that's really something that they, I mean, when you're that big, you have to. I mean, they're carrying what, 1.5 trillion dollars in assets. Like
assets. That's insane.
that is insane.
So, so moving on to another company that's made headlines this week, Tesla. So, 2023 proved to be a poor year for, Tesla in terms of its financials because, I mean, it missed, all but one quarter, and even the last, back-to-back quarters has been bad. And turns out 2024 was no different with another poor quarter from Tesla. I mean, if you look at, its share price, I mean, it's down, almost 13% this week and about
Yeah.
29% for the past month. It's just, yeah, it's sad to see such a, big and innovative company, you know, doing so poorly. But do you think it's a reflection of either the markets or, specifically the electric car market?
So it's interesting. I think Tesla's going through the same growing pains that Apple did back in the 80s, now that you say it. And let's compare the two companies, because I think they both were tremendously revolutionary for their
Yeah,
time.
I would say
Um,
that Tesla's the Apple of the car industry.
yeah. And, incidentally, like, we spoke about this once before. My son actually looks at Tesla and he says, a Tesla doesn't get, it just gets, its software upgrade. So it's a computer. It's not a car. It's a computer that drives. Whereas some of
That's,
the
yeah,
competitors
yeah,
are saying, no, we're a electric car, and the
yeah,
computer is a component of it. So it's an interesting,
yeah.
like, perspective of how, you approach the particular product or the end product of the vehicle. Is it a computer that drives, or is it a car that has computer
That
components?
happens to
Or
have a computer. Yeah,
so
it's a
it's
good
it,
way
it
to be revolutionary in that industry. And for a long time, it's paid off. I mean, Tesla. It still boggles the mind that Tesla is valued higher than a company like Volkswagen or Toyota. Both of those companies make millions and millions of vehicles a year compared to Tesla's 100,000 plus. And yet Tesla still has a higher market capitalization. It's
So I
crazy.
agree with you completely. And this is the thing that's very interesting about Tesla, is that maybe that's why they didn't have to make any kind of revisions to their models so much. Because if you look at their
Yeah.
models, they're pretty much the same model. Besides the Cybertruck, they pretty much look like the same thing.
Yeah.
They have
It's an aging
variations
lineup.
to
Yeah.
them. And so the actual composition of the design of it from outside is very redundant. And I think that that is hurting them. And I think also the fact, so it's a combination of things. It's China, it's competitors coming up. There's a couple of companies that have, BYD is one company that is coming up against them in China, which is a Chinese company.
Yeah.
There's Rivian and Lucid, which are Lucid is former um, officers, executives from Tesla that started up their
Mm.
own company. And that's a decent. And then you
So,
have, the flagships, the BMWs, the Volvos,
oh yeah, I
the
mean, all
Mercedes that are.
most of the big players are now making electric cars. I mean,
So that
BMW has gone mainstream with its range.
so
So
this is really interesting, because we have all these major kind of car companies creating competition against Tesla. So it's a variation of a few issues right now, and this is I still think that Tesla is a forward-thinking company, just like Apple is, and they will, they may go through growing pains, but I think that that they will continue to grow at the pace that they're growing, but they may see dips because they're so revolutionary, and that's the way they operate.
I always ask this when it comes to earnings season, but at least this time I've got a range to work with, right? They released their earnings um on January 24th, right? It's been 72 hours. Clearly there's, a downtrend. With Tesla stock trading at 182. So, would it be prudent to buy the dip? I mean, this is a company that, like you said, and we've seen as ways to innovate. I mean, we'll set aside the Cybertruck for now. I mean, we're not going to see its impact until the next quarter. It's way too early to see in terms of sales. But right now, what do you think about trading Tesla?
So this is the thing. I don't like to pick bottoms. It's like, what they say. It's like picking bottoms is like catching a knife that's falling, and you're going to get cut, right? So I don't like to pick bottoms. But this is the thing. At the same time, if you're as an investor, so and this is also, it's your time horizon aspect of it. Because if you're an investor like Warren Buffett, you don't really care about the entry price that you're going in, because
Yeah.
from year to year, it'll make its worth back because the company's worth what it's worth, and the stock market will catch up to it. And that's their perspective on things. So, that's a element that I can't really, make comments on, because that's somebody else's trading strategy or investing strategy. And, that's really public. Warren Buffett actually published a book, The Buffett's Way. And, there are criteria. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 criterias that if the company meets those criterias, he ends up investing in them. And through time, they actually show some tremendous, potential and some tremendous returns.
It's amazing insight the man has.
Yeah.
Moving on to another company, IBM. They're not, for lack of a better word, the sexiest player in the tech game, but they've had consistent earnings for the better part of the past 5 years. And 2024 is no different, with once again the company, beating earnings. What do you think of IBM as a stock?
So, Big Blue, as we like to call it, okay,
Yeah,
as it's well known, it's been around since the early 1900s. I believe we looked it up.
wow,
It was 1911, 1912. It's been around.
that's
Uh,
insane.
that is insane. So it's the first real computer company to stand the test of time. Okay, now they benefited from the roller coaster ride of the 1990s, when computers became household PC, personal
Yeah,
computers. Before that, computers were around, but they were for more institutional, financial,
yeah. I mean,
or
it would take up
otherwise.
the better part of a warehouse, you know,
So
back in the
their
70s.
niche hasn't really changed. They've just stuck to their business model, and that's why they are not like Nvidia. That's why they're not
Yeah,
like Microsoft. That's why they're
Microsoft.
not
I
like
was going to
Apple.
say, despite being technically the grandfather of big tech, it's just fascinating for me. I mean, I'm looking at their earnings, and you're talking about double-digit figures in the billions, compared to like Google or Apple or Microsoft, which are earning triple digits in the billions. I
So
mean, there's such a stark difference.
because it's
Oh, oh,
the
yeah,
mentality, it's the way the company is, American companies have a mission statement, and the mission statement really is I want to say, like, the beacon. It's the guiding post. It's the rule book of the company by which the company survives and exists on. Okay. And it's the why the company exists on, and what's their vision and what's their mission in life. Okay. And those are loaded words: vision, mission,
yeah,
why they exist. Okay. Those are really, you could break that down. And, their company hasn't really changed in the last 100 years, 100+ years have been around, because they have the same vision and they have the same
yeah,
mission, and it just is a model that works for them. Now, they're not looking to be the biggest player in the market. They're looking to fulfill their mission, and as long as they're fulfilling their mission, they have a reason to exist.
mm,
Um, and it's
that's
run like an old school kind of company. And in fact, it's actually not listed on the Nasdaq, which you'll find most of the high tech companies,
yeah,
Microsoft, Apple, Intel, all those, um, I would say from 1975, 1980 onwards, which are located on the Nasdaq, they're actually listed on the New York Stock Exchange, which is completely, and they were never regarded. I mean, I remember back in the day when I was trading, the internet companies, the eBays, the Yahoos, and they were high flying companies. Um, and I remember IBM would not even be a factor. And it's kind of funny because there are a few of them that are not a factor, but have evolved to be a factor. Like, um, what's that called? When we call the FANG stocks. The
yes,
FANG stocks are just a relatively new term for it, but some of them have been around since the 1990s, right? Apple's been around
yeah,
from the 1990s. Amazon has been around from the 1990s, but it was never a bellwether. It was never a standard. In those days, Intel and Cisco were a standard, okay? Which I would argue today they still are. But the FANG stocks are a standard today. It's like an index. You could, base yourself based on it. So IBM was never one of those because it only played its mission statement. So, it's a completely different type of company and it's run completely different, even though it's in high tech. And that's why you see their consistent results over time because they stay to their niche and they're run very much like corporate America is run. Like if you look at their structure, it's no different than an automobile company, than a cigarette company, than an insurance company in the United States. It's got that same structure.
I'd love to unpack that. Um, and I think we should. It could be quite cool to do a comparison between, the rock stars of, the tech industry, your Apples, your Google, versus IBM, which hasn't changed its logo, I don't think, in the past
I
30
mean,
years.
you should have seen the commercials that used to come out against IBM and Microsoft, by Apple. It used to make so much fun of them because that would be like the geeky people. And
Yeah.
Apple was visionary. It was revolutionary. He was making a revolution. Like Steve
Yeah.
Jobs knew. Like he's like, I want to shake up the corporate world. I want to come
And he
into,
did.
and he did. I want to come into $1 billion, meeting with my sandals and my shorts, my cut up jean shorts and a t-shirt. In those days, nobody did that.
I think my favorite story, I'm not sure of the veracity of this, but I remember reading that the idea for the original iPad came about where they were discussing, they were discussing touchscreens. It's still in its infancy. And Steve Jobs, in a meeting with his engineers, snapped the laptop in half and said, I want all of this. And he pointed to, the keyboard section with all the bits and said, I want all of this inside this. And he held up the screen. This is our new product, just this. And apparently that was the genesis for the iPad, which, if true, is amazing.
I
And
mean,
an
it wasn't
amazing
that.
man.
I mean, I remember that era, and
Yeah.
it evolved. I mean, like Apple really was a, if you want to start, discuss Darwinism, Apple was that because Apple initially came out with a MP3. What brought Apple back from the brinks of disaster was their first MP3 player,
Yeah. I mean,
which
they were going bankrupt.
they were bankrupt
Yeah.
almost, yeah. And Ross Perot, which was the first Donald Trump candidate of in the 1990s, and really also that was if you want to talk about election years and hysterics, that was an interesting election year because he really shook up the foundation of the political scheme in those days, and maybe that was why Trump actually got elected because it wasn't so foreign anymore. You needed the first person just to introduce the idea, and then the next person was successful about carrying it through. And I think that was a case in point in U.S. political history. Anyway, but going back to Apple, it was an evolution. It was first the MP3 player, which was a very simple thing, and it was better than
I
the
remember.
competitors of
I
the
owned
time.
one.
And then it went into touchscreen, right?
Yeah.
It would look
iPod
like something
Touch.
like the iPhone. And
Yeah,
then
that
they made
was
the
that was
iPhone,
amazing.
which completely killed BlackBerry because BlackBerry had most of that market at the time. Now BlackBerry is not even a word.
Yeah.
Like the stock
It's
is,
weird. It's weird to think that there was a stage where, BlackBerry dominated.
oh, it
Pretty
was
much
like
everything.
only
Everyone had a
BlackBerry.
BlackBerry. Yeah. There was a time when that was a thing. I remember there used to be competitions where people would see how fast they could type. Back then, phones still came with buttons. This is
Because,
even
right.
before BlackBerry decided. I mean, it was 5 years too late with the
No,
BlackBerry
BlackBerry
Touch.
lost their edge. They lost their edge
Yeah.
because I
Um, you know, I'd love to unpack each one of these companies, but I think I'm gonna have to end it soon. But before we go, what advice do you have for traders this earnings season, Fred?
okay, so markets are mixed. Like Tesla missed, IBM beat. And in this type of environment where seeing by and large the tech stocks are doing fantastic. Microsoft is on all-time highs. Facebook is back to on its highs. The giants, the Googles, the Amazons are doing well. And so, yes, I know it's become an old story, maybe 2023, and now it's 2024, so move on. But it's still making new highs. So I'm not, why break something that's already working? So as long as the tech sector is still making new highs, and it might be a rotation, like it might be the chip makers, AMD, NVIDIA, Intel, and then it might be, the internet companies, the Apple, the Amazons, the Googles, and then it might be something else. But, you have to be stock specific and really just follow the stock, because I think that that's what's going to make a big difference. And let's put a monkey wrench into it. We're going into elections the next 8 months.
Oh, yeah.
So that's going to be a really interesting, if not entertaining.
I mean, we already have the primaries, very, very soon. It's going to be a very interesting year leading up to November.
And I would say even entertaining. I would argue more entertaining than interesting.
Yeah. I got to say, I find the US elections highly entertaining. I'm fascinated by it.
They do it on purpose.
Yeah, I mean, it is a spectacle. I mean, I've never seen, no other country, I don't think, has this many rallies, this many, events. It's like a blockbuster event leading up to the elections. It's something else to watch if you're on the outside. I mean,
Listen,
I
Americans
suppose for
have what to
Americans
be
it's the
proud of.
norm, but this is not the norm for other countries. You'll be
No, it's
lucky if
not.
you see a few ads, for example, in South Africa, or even attend a rally, an election rally before the national elections, which
Yeah,
is
because in
incidentally
America,
happening in
it's
South
very
Africa.
transparent, and you do have control. The people do have control. It's a democracy. It's a real democracy. It's the truest
Yeah,
form of democracy. And,
yeah.
the people have the power. It's really true that the people have the power. And that's unique and it's special. And I know Americans are made fun of it, but at the same time, they have what to say for it. It's a capitalistic, democratic country. And with that comes a lot of benefits.
Awesome. To all our listeners and viewers out there, please like and subscribe, and I will catch you on the next one, Fred.
Thank you.